Welcome to Globewise Entertainment, your ultimate gateway to the untold stories, hidden truths, and fascinating controversies of the movie world. Today, we're diving deep into the wild, bold, and rebellious world of the controversial 1960s sci-fi films that got banned. These are the movies that dared to push boundaries, challenge authority, and spark debates that echo even today. From political scandals to shocking plotlines, these films weren't just entertainment, they were cinematic rebellions. So, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our community of film lovers. And after watching, tell us in the comments, which of these banned classics would you risk watching back in the day? 1. H2S, 1969. The Italian sci-fi film the government tried to erase. In the turbulent cultural climate of the late 1960s, when students marched in the streets and political tensions simmered across Europe, a young Italian filmmaker named Roberto Faenza set out to make a bold statement. His project, H2S, was no ordinary science fiction film. It was a sharp, symbolic critique of authority, conformity, and the rise of state control. The film's premise is deceptively simple. A young man returns from abroad to find his home city transformed into a sterile, authoritarian society where individuality is suppressed and free thought is outlawed. The ruling elite, dressed in cold military-style uniforms, control every aspect of life. Citizens are expected to obey without question. The title H2S, a reference to hydrogen sulfide gas, was a dark metaphor for a suffocating political system that poisoned the very air people breathed. But what truly made H2S controversial was not just its dystopian vision, it was how uncomfortably close to home its story felt. Italy in 1969 was experiencing waves of social unrest, with clashes between students, workers, and the establishment. Many saw the film as a thinly veiled attack on the country's ruling structures. The government certainly thought so. When the movie was completed, Italian censors wasted no time. They banned it outright, accusing Faenza of producing subversive material that threatened public order. This wasn't just a quiet shelving. The authorities reportedly seized prints of the film, ensuring it could not be shown in theaters. It would remain unseen by Italian audiences for years. Adding to the intrigue, the film's production design was strikingly ahead of its time, white, minimalist sets that eerily predicted the futuristic aesthetics of later classics like A Clockwork Orange. The costumes, props, and even the framing of shots all hinted at a world drained of color and humanity, a chilling vision of what could happen if authoritarianism took full control. By banning H2S, the Italian government inadvertently gave it a kind of underground fame. People who had never seen it whispered about its content, speculated on its dangerous ideas, and passed around fragments of the story. It became a film you had to hear about in hushed tones, an urban legend in Italian cinema history. It wasn't until 1971, 2 years later, that H2S was finally released, and even then, it was in a heavily edited form. By that point, the cultural moment had shifted, and while it never reached mainstream commercial success, it earned a cult following among cinephiles and political film enthusiasts. Today, H2S stands as a rare example of science fiction used as political protest, a reminder that speculative storytelling can hit so close to reality that those in power feel compelled to silence it. Its banning is not just a footnote in film history, it's a case study in how art, politics, and censorship collide. 2. Matango, 1963. Japan's Forbidden Mushroom Nightmare. In 1963, Japanese moviegoers were introduced to a film so unsettling that it nearly never saw the light of day. Matango, also known internationally as Attack of the Mushroom People. On the surface, it was just another mid-century monster flick, but beneath its pulp fiction exterior was a disturbing allegory that touched on some of Japan's deepest scars. Directed by Ishiro Honda, the legendary filmmaker behind Godzilla, the story follows a group of wealthy pleasure seekers whose yacht becomes stranded on a remote island. At first, it seems like paradise, until they discover strange, oversized mushrooms growing everywhere. Starving and desperate, they begin to eat the fungus, and that's when the horror begins. The mushrooms don't just satisfy hunger, they change people. Slowly, the characters lose their humanity, both physically and morally, transforming into grotesque mushroom creatures. The more they eat, the less they remember who they once were. While this might sound like pure fantasy, Japanese audiences recognized the haunting symbolism immediately. The disfigured, hollow-eyed mushroom creatures bore a chilling resemblance to the hibakusha, survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings, whose burn scars and physical trauma were still a raw subject in the early 1960s. Japanese censors feared the resemblance would be seen as disrespectful or politically explosive, so the film's release was delayed, and in some cases, screenings were heavily restricted. Internationally, it was either retitled, edited down, or kept off screens entirely. In the US, it went straight to television in a watered-down version that stripped away much of its grim atmosphere. Over the years, Matango has developed a cult following among sci-fi and horror fans, praised for its eerie tone, slow-burn psychological tension, and unsettling practical effects. Modern critics now see it as more than a monster movie. It's a cautionary tale about isolation, temptation, and the corrosive effect of desperation. What makes Matango so memorable isn't just its surreal visuals, but its ability to blur the line between the fantastical and the painfully real. In an era when most monster movies were loud and campy, Matango was quiet, moody, and unnervingly human. Today, the film stands as a powerful reminder of how science fiction can be more than escapism. It can be a mirror reflecting the fears, wounds, and moral questions of its time. 3. On the Silver Globe, 1970. The sci-fi epic that vanished before our eyes. Imagine working for years on a film so ambitious it was called Poland's Answer to 2001, A Space Odyssey, only to have the government step in and order it destroyed before anyone could see it. That's exactly what happened to On the Silver Globe, a breathtaking sci-fi epic from visionary director Andrzej Zulawski. Filming began in the late 1960s, based on a trilogy of novels written decades earlier by the director's own great-uncle, Jerzy Zulawski. The story was daring for its time. Astronauts crash land on a distant planet, founding a new society that evolves into a strange, almost religious civilization, only for a new traveler from Earth to arrive centuries later and be hailed as a messiah. It wasn't just science fiction, it was a bold allegory about power, politics, and how belief systems can be manipulated, ideas that didn't sit well with the Polish communist authorities of the era. By 1977, the film was nearly complete. Sets had been built in remote deserts, actors had endured grueling conditions, and the visuals were unlike anything seen in Eastern European cinema. But then came the crushing blow. The Ministry of Culture shut down production, claiming it was too expensive and politically confused. In truth, many believe its themes of oppressive authority hit a little too close to home. The government ordered costumes destroyed, sets dismantled, and the film's footage locked away. Zulawski was exiled from Poland. On the Silver Globe became one of cinema's great lost films, whispered about among fans, but unseen for over a decade. In the late 1980s, Zulawski was finally allowed to return and piece together what remained. Missing scenes were replaced with narrated still images and footage of modern-day Poland, a haunting reminder of what had been erased. The restored version debuted in 1988 to critical awe, earning a perfect score from some film critics, but it was still incomplete, a ghost of the masterpiece it might have been. Today, On the Silver Globe stands as a symbol of artistic resistance. It's not just a banned movie, it's a cinematic time capsule, showing how far a government would go to silence a vision they couldn't control. 4. Less Creatures, 1966. The forgotten sci-fi gem that vanished. In the mid-1960s, French filmmaker Agnès Varda, often called the grandmother of the French New Wave, took an unexpected creative leap. She set aside realistic dramas and dove headfirst into science fiction. The result was Less Creatures, a surreal, experimental, and visually arresting film unlike anything audiences had ever seen. The story follows a writer, played by Michel Piccoli, and his wife, portrayed by Catherine Deneuve, as they move to a small island. But this island is no ordinary place. Its inhabitants are subtly manipulated by mysterious, otherworldly forces. The line between reality and imagination blurs, and soon, the writer's fiction seems to shape the fate of the people around him. Varda infused the film with bold ideas. Black and white to color shifts to represent changing states of mind. A strange, chess-like battle for control over human will. Dialogue that felt more like poetry than conversation. But in 1966, the world wasn't ready. Critics in France and abroad slammed it as incomprehensible and self-indulgent. Even though it wasn't officially banned by a government, the backlash was so severe that the film was pulled from circulation. Distributors refused to screen it, and for decades, Less Creatures simply disappeared, locked away like it had never existed. It became what cinephiles call a suppressed film, not banned by law, but effectively erased by the industry's unwillingness to show it. This was especially tragic because Less Creatures was one of the few female-directed science fiction films of the 1960s, an era when the genre was dominated by male voices. For Agnes Varda, the experience was deeply personal. She later admitted the rejection was so painful it made her retreat from fiction for years. The film only resurfaced decades later, when archivists restored it, allowing a new generation to finally see its strange beauty. Today, Less Creatures is celebrated as a visionary cult sci-fi experiment, proof that daring ideas can survive even after decades of being forgotten. And in the modern era, its themes of manipulation, control, and blurred reality feel more relevant than ever. So why did Less Creatures vanish for so long? Because in the 1960s, breaking the rules of storytelling didn't just confuse audiences, it could make a movie disappear entirely. 5. The Silent Star, 1960. The Cold War sci-fi that sparked a storm. In 1960, at the height of the Cold War, a dazzling new sci-fi film hit Eastern European cinemas, The Silent Star. Produced in East Germany and Poland, it promised audiences a thrilling voyage to Venus, based on a novel by celebrated sci-fi author Stanislav Lem. But this wasn't just another space adventure. This film was loaded with political tension, futuristic spectacle, and a message that proved far too bold for its time. Set in the distant future of 1985, The Silent Star follows an international crew who discover a mysterious record from Venus. Decoding it, they realize the message is a warning, or perhaps a threat. The crew sets out on a daring interplanetary mission, hoping to make peaceful contact. But what they find is haunting. The Venusians have already destroyed themselves through nuclear war. It was a sobering, timely theme, a clear cautionary tale about humanity's own nuclear arms race. The film born in the Cold War. While the visual effects were groundbreaking for 1960, featuring enormous spacecraft sets, dazzling planetary landscapes, and high-concept designs, the underlying politics made waves. Western audiences saw the film as Soviet propaganda, painting a not-so-subtle portrait of capitalist nations as the villains of Earth's nuclear tensions. In the US, the film was heavily edited, stripped of its political references, and released under a different name, First Spaceship on Venus. Entire scenes were cut, dialogue was rewritten, and even the pacing was changed, transforming it into a different movie altogether. The author turns away. Perhaps the most surprising controversy came from Stanislav Lem himself. The famed Polish writer, whose novel The Astronauts inspired the film, publicly distanced himself from it. He criticized the movie for being overly simplistic and politically slanted, saying it twisted his story into something he never intended. His decision to have his name removed from certain credits only fueled the mystery and debate around the movie. Bans, cuts, and censorship. While The Silent Star wasn't outright banned everywhere, it was effectively censored through re-editing in many countries. Some European territories refused to screen it at all during its original run, citing its political bias. Others only allowed it in government-approved versions. This patchwork release meant audiences across the world were never really watching the same film. Each version reflected the politics of the region where it was shown. Legacy that endures. Today, The Silent Star is remembered not only as one of the first East German space epics, but also as a cautionary tale about how art and politics can collide in the heat of history. In restored prints, the film's stunning visuals and haunting anti-war message shine through, offering a glimpse into a future imagined more than 60 years ago, yet still eerily relevant. So, what do you think? Was The Silent Star a misunderstood masterpiece, or a piece of propaganda disguised as science fiction? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying our journey through the controversial 1960s sci-fi films that got banned, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss the next forgotten gem. 6. Wild Angels, 1966. The film that rode straight into censorship trouble. In the mid-1960s, American cinema was revving its engines toward a cultural shift. Among the films leading that charge was Wild Angels, 1966, directed by Roger Corman. While not a space epic or laser-blasting adventure, this rebellious biker drama became a surprising part of the sci-fi adjacent controversy list because of its futuristic, almost dystopian portrayal of outlaw motorcycle gangs, a vision that felt alien and dangerous to conservative audiences of the time. Starring Peter Fonda and Nancy Sinatra, the movie followed a lawless biker gang on a chaotic road trip filled with violence, drugs, and an anti-establishment attitude that mainstream America wasn't ready to embrace. Corman's unflinching realism, showing wild parties, brawls, and police clashes, made it feel like a gritty documentary from a future where society's rules had broken down. When Wild Angels premiered, the controversy hit full throttle. In the UK, the British Board of Film Censors refused a certificate, calling it immoral and inciting to delinquency. Certain US cities also banned screenings, fearing it would inspire copycat biker violence. The irony? The film didn't glorify the gang. It depicted their lives as empty and self-destructive. But for many censors, nuance didn't matter. The imagery alone was too hot to handle. The backlash only made the movie more popular. Young audiences saw it as a symbol of rebellion, while critics argued it was a mirror reflecting America's growing counterculture. Over time, Wild Angels became a cult classic, influencing films like Easy Rider and shaping the way Hollywood portrayed outlaw subcultures. Today, it stands as a reminder of a time when simply showing raw reality, without a Hollywood sugarcoat, was enough to get a film banned. And in the 1960s, that kind of honesty felt as dangerous as any alien invasion. 7. This Rebel Breed, 1960. The shocking story of This Rebel Breed, 1960, the sci-fi tinge drama too hot for theaters. In 1960, America was in the grip of a cultural storm. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, youth rebellion was shaking up tradition, and Hollywood was beginning to take dangerous creative risks. And then came This Rebel Breed, a film that didn't just test the waters, it dove straight into controversy. Though marketed as a teen gang action drama, the movie carried a surprising undercurrent of science fiction-style storytelling, with hyper-stylized visuals, exaggerated, near-future, social settings, and almost pulp comic dialogue that made it feel like something out of a dystopian paperback. But its real power came from its subject matter. The plot followed two undercover police officers infiltrating racially divided high school gangs, one made up of white youths, the other of Black and Latino teens. This wasn't just about rumbles and switchblades. The film tackled interracial romance, systemic prejudice, and corrupt authority figures in a way most movies of the time avoided. And that's where the trouble began. In the early 1960s, much of America still enforced strict segregation laws. Even suggesting interracial relationships was enough to set censors on edge. Some local theaters refused to screen This Rebel Breed, fearing backlash from community leaders. In Memphis, Tennessee, the movie was outright banned, deemed too inflammatory for audiences. Other southern states heavily edited or completely blocked it. But the censorship wasn't just about race. The movie's violent gang scenes and blunt moral commentary were considered too raw for the era. Critics called it exploitation disguised as social justice, while others praised it for daring to show an unflinching portrait of youth conflict. Interestingly, this rebel breed became a lost film for decades, re-released in the late 60s under new titles like Black Rebels and 3 Shades of Love, sometimes with extra salacious footage spliced in to appeal to the growing grindhouse crowd. In these later versions, its faint sci-fi edge, the stylized setting that felt slightly removed from real-world America, made it an odd bridge between social drama and pulp cinema. Today, this rebel breed stands as a fascinating time capsule, part rebellious teen exploitation flick, part proto-sci-fi morality tale, and 100% a product of its turbulent time. Its ban in certain regions speaks volumes about the racial and cultural anxieties of early 1960s America, and its survival as a cult curiosity proves that even controversial films can outlive the outrage they cause. 8. Queen Bee, 1963. In the glittering yet turbulent world of 1960s cinema, few films stirred quiet controversy quite like Queen Bee. Released in 1963, this unusual blend of psychological drama and speculative allegory hit a sharp sting beneath its glossy surface. At first glance, it seemed like a simple story of a powerful woman manipulating those around her, but beneath the melodrama was a daring metaphor for authoritarian control, gender politics, and the seductive dangers of unchecked power. Set in a near-future society that looked suspiciously like our own, Queen Bee followed a ruthless matriarch who ruled her circle with absolute authority, not unlike a queen ruling a hive. While never marketed as a pure science fiction film, its allegorical vision of social engineering and hive-like conformity struck an unsettling chord with censors. Italy's censorship board, in particular, took issue. Officials claimed the film's power dynamics were a thinly veiled critique of certain political figures of the time. Add to that the subtle but daring hints at sexual autonomy, manipulation, and female dominance, all taboo for conservative audiences, and Queen Bee was promptly banned from Italian theaters. The ban only fueled the film's mystique. Underground screenings popped up in university film clubs, where cinephiles debated whether the real science fiction was the futuristic setting, or the way the movie imagined a society willing to surrender freedom for order under a single, all-powerful leader. Today, Queen Bee survives as a rare and fascinating example of 1960s speculative cinema, a film that blurred the line between drama and sci-fi, fiction and political truth. Its banishment in Italy became part of its legend, proving that sometimes, the stories we try to silence are the ones that echo the loudest. If you love uncovering lost and controversial sci-fi gems from the 1960s, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us for more hidden cinematic stories. And tell us in the comments, do you think Queen Bee was too bold for its time, or was it exactly the story the world needed to hear? 9. The Collector, 1965. The chilling tale that shook censors. In 1965, director William Wyler, known for sweeping epics like Ben-Hur, shocked audiences with something far more intimate and unsettling. The Collector wasn't a space adventure with rockets and alien worlds, but it carried a psychological sci-fi edge that made it stand out in a decade obsessed with Cold War paranoia and human experimentation. Based on John Fowles' acclaimed novel, the story follows Freddie Clegg, Terrence Stamp, a socially awkward loner whose obsession with a young art student, Miranda Gray, Samantha Eggar, drives him to a terrifying plan. After winning a fortune in a football pool, Freddie buys an isolated country house and kidnaps Miranda, keeping her locked in a basement room, convinced that if he holds her long enough, she will eventually love him. While not sci-fi in the traditional sense of aliens and time machines, the film taps into speculative psychological horror, an exploration of how isolation, control, and obsession can warp the human mind, similar to dystopian stories where people are treated like experiments or possessions. In a decade when films like Fahrenheit 451 and Alphaville were pushing boundaries, The Collector stood out for applying that same dystopian unease to an everyday human monster. Why it was banned? When The Collector arrived in New Zealand, censorship boards were horrified. They deemed the film disturbing and morally dangerous, banning it outright. Their fear wasn't about gore, there's virtually none, but about ideas. The way the film methodically shows the psychological grooming, manipulation, and control of a victim. Some critics worried it could inspire real-life crimes, a fear not uncommon in the censorship debates of the 1960s. In Britain and the US, it escaped an outright ban but faced heavy criticism for its unsettling tone and morally ambiguous ending. The fact that the story forces viewers to spend so much time in the kidnapper's perspective made it deeply controversial. Cultural impact. Despite the controversy, the film received 3 Academy Award nominations, with Samantha Eggar winning Best Actress at Cannes. Today, it's often discussed as a chilling precursor to later, captor-victim, psychological thrillers like Misery and Room. Its sci-fi edge lies in its ability to imagine a controlled, isolated micro-world where one person decides the rules, echoing themes of power and dehumanization that define much of 1960s speculative fiction. For audiences of the time, The Collector was more than just a thriller. It was a mirror held up to a darker possibility within ordinary society. And for censors, that mirror was too dangerous to leave unshattered. 10. Ulysses, 1967. The sci-fi adjacent odyssey that shook censors. In the swinging 60s, science fiction wasn't just about rockets and robots, it was about ideas. Big, daring, unsettling ideas. And few films pushed boundaries like Joseph Strick's Ulysses, the audacious 1967 adaptation of James Joyce's 1922 novel. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Ulysses isn't a sci-fi movie. And technically you'd be right, but here's the twist. The original novel was considered so groundbreaking in structure, so ahead of its time, that it was often described as a kind of literary science experiment. And Strick's film adaptation was just as radical, bending cinematic rules, breaking taboos, and using techniques that felt more like avant-garde speculative cinema than straight drama. A story too dangerous for the screen. When Ulysses hit theaters in 1967, it carried with it decades of controversy. Joyce's book had been banned in several countries for obscenity, and Strick wasn't about to tone it down. The movie stayed largely faithful to Joyce's wandering, stream-of-consciousness style, including the sexually explicit monologues that had enraged censors decades earlier. This wasn't pulp entertainment. It was experimental, almost psychedelic. Dialogue often drifted into dreamlike imagery, time and memory blended together, and the film used sudden flashcuts and inner-thought narration, devices that felt like cinematic science fiction. But those bold choices came with a price. Censorship strikes. In Ireland, Joyce's own homeland, the movie was immediately banned for subversive and obscene content. In the United Kingdom, it ran into trouble too. Glasgow and Edinburgh city councils outright refused to screen it. Even in Canada and parts of Australia, the film was restricted or heavily edited, often with full scenes removed. Why such resistance? For some, it was the infamous Molly Bloom's soliloquy, a frank, unfiltered stream of thoughts about love, sex, and desire. For others, it was the experimental presentation itself, nonlinear storytelling, visual distortions, and surreal camera angles that unsettled traditional audiences and gave the film a dangerous reputation. The legacy. Ironically, the bans only fueled Ulysses' cult status. University film societies, underground cinemas, and art house theaters smuggled in 16mm prints, hosting secret late-night screenings. It became a badge of honor to say you'd seen it, like being part of a countercultural experiment. Today, Ulysses is recognized not only as a daring literary adaptation but as a 1960s film that blurred the line between art cinema and speculative experimentation, earning its place in any discussion of controversial sci-fi adjacent films of the decade. Final thought. In an era when censorship boards were still cutting the dangerous edges off movies, Ulysses stood firm, refusing to compromise its artistic vision. It's a reminder that science fiction isn't just about spaceships, it's about challenging the limits of imagination, whether in the far future or in the uncharted territories of the human mind. 11. Easy Rider, 1969. In 1969, America was on the brink of cultural explosion. And then came Easy Rider, a low-budget road movie that roared across the silver screen, challenged authority, and ultimately it got banned. The rise of a counterculture icon. Easy Rider wasn't your typical Hollywood production. Directed by Dennis Hopper and starring Hopper, Peter Fonda, and a young Jack Nicholson, it was a rebellious ride into the heart of a changing America. The film followed two bikers smuggling drug money from Mexico, using it to chase freedom on the open road. Along the way, it exposed small-town prejudice, generational divides, and the creeping disillusionment of the 1960s dream. Why it became controversial. The problem? Easy Rider didn't just show the counterculture, it embraced it. It featured graphic drug use on camera, those campfire scenes, real marijuana. It challenged the American dream with a raw, unfiltered lens. And it ended with one of the most shocking, abrupt acts of violence in mainstream cinema. This didn't sit well with censorship boards in more conservative countries. In France, authorities initially banned the film outright, claiming it glorified drugs, anarchy, and anti-establishment ideals. In parts of the UK and Australia, screenings were restricted to adults only, often accompanied by moral panic headlines. Behind the scenes, chaos and creativity. Filming was notoriously chaotic. Hopper's erratic directing style, clashes with crew members, and spontaneous scene changes pushed the budget up, but the authenticity down the road paid off. Jack Nicholson's breakthrough role as the alcoholic lawyer George Hansen became an instant fan favorite, and the soundtrack, from Steppenwolf's Born to be Wild to The Byrds' Wasn't Born to Follow, became a counterculture anthem. Legacy after the ban. Ironically, the bans and restrictions only fueled curiosity. By the time the film got full release clearance, Easy Rider had transformed into a symbol of freedom and rebellion for young people across the globe. It earned over $60 million worldwide on a budget of less than $400,000, making it one of the most profitable films of the decade. Today, it's preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Easy Rider may have been banned in its day, but in the end, the open road couldn't be silenced. It wasn't just a movie, it was a movement. 12. Dr. Jivago, 1965. The romance that shook the Cold War. When people think of Dr. Jivago, they often picture sweeping snow-covered landscapes, epic train journeys, and a love story that could melt even the iciest Russian winter. But behind the romance and beauty lies one of the most politically charged controversies in cinema history, a film that some nations feared so much they banned it outright. Directed by David Lean, the master behind Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Jivago was based on the novel by Russian author Boris Pasternak. The story follows Yuri Jivago, a physician and poet, as he navigates love, loyalty, and survival during the Russian Revolution and the brutal years of civil war. But here's where the controversy starts. Pasternak's book was banned in the Soviet Union. The Soviet government claimed it painted a negative and unpatriotic picture of the revolution, portraying it not as a glorious people's uprising, but as a time of suffering, loss, and shattered dreams. In a twist straight out of a spy thriller, the manuscript had to be smuggled out of the USSR to be published in Italy in 1957. Pasternak would later win the Nobel Prize for Literature, an honor the Soviet regime forced him to refuse under political pressure. The book's forbidden status made it a symbol of resistance in the West, and Hollywood couldn't resist adapting it for the big screen. But when the film was released in 1965, its reception was as icy as a Siberian winter in some parts of the world. The Soviet Union immediately banned it, labeling it Western propaganda designed to undermine communism. Other communist nations followed suit. Even outside the Eastern Bloc, controversy flared. In Thailand, the film was banned for its perceived promotion of communist ideals, a strange irony considering the Soviets had banned it for being anti-communist. In India, authorities also pulled it from theaters, concerned about its political implications during a sensitive period of Cold War diplomacy. Yet despite the bans, Dr. Jivago became a runaway success in the West. Audiences were swept away by Maurice Jarre's haunting score, especially Lara's theme, the stunning cinematography, and the bittersweet romance between Omar Sharif's Yuri Jivago and Julie Christie's Lara. In fact, the very controversy that surrounded it only fueled interest. People wanted to see the film that governments didn't want them to watch. Over the decades, Dr. Jivago has transformed from a Cold War political football into one of the most beloved epics in cinema history. Today, it's a reminder that art doesn't just tell stories, it challenges ideologies, crosses borders, and sometimes threatens those in power. And in the case of Dr. Jivago, a love story was powerful enough to be seen as a weapon. And there you have it, the daring, the bold, and the unforgettable controversial 1960s sci-fi films that got banned. These movies didn't just push the limits of imagination, they pushed the limits of what society, and even governments, would allow. Some were hidden away for decades, but their impact is still felt today. If you haven't already, subscribe to Globewise Entertainment so you never miss another journey into the hidden corners of cinema history. And now, it's your turn. Which of these banned classics would you have watched first? Drop your pick in the comments. We can't wait to see what you say.